So in this video, we're going to look at graphing linear inequalities. So the first thing we need to do is go over a couple of rules about how we actually go about doing this. The good thing is you're going to graph an inequality the same way you would graph a normal line. So you're going to have like a slope, you're going to have like a rise over run, and you're going to have a y-intercept, which if you remember is b. So all that's still going to be the same. The only difference is now we have to pay attention to our symbols. So if you see a greater than or equal to or less than or equal to, instead of a solid line, well, actually, I'm saying that backwards. We're going to use a solid line for those graphs, okay? So that one's going to be solid. Now, this is the one I was about to say. Greater than or less than, you're actually going to use a dotted line, or some people say a dashed line, same thing. So dotted line. So when we actually make our graph and we graph our line, if it is one of these two at the top, so greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, solid line. If it's one of these at the bottom, less than or greater than, then we make a dotted line. All right, so that's the first thing. Then the last part, because everything else works the same, which is good for us. The last part is this. If you see greater than or equal to or greater than, that means you're going to shade above the line. So shade above. If you see less than or equal to or less than, you're going to shade below. So that's really the main rules we have to remember. All right, so let's actually start looking at graphing a few of these, and let me try to zoom in here so that we can make this look a little bit nicer when we actually graph it. All right, that should give us plenty of room. All right, so let's start off with a problem. Let's say I want to graph y is less than 2 over 3x minus 1. Now, just like I mentioned previously, y equals mx plus b, that's how we usually set our problem up to graph a line. Except now, instead of an equal sign, we're going to have an inequality symbol. But nothing's going to change. Everything is still going to be the same except how we go about graphing it. But we still are going to have an m, which is slope, and a b, which is the y-intercept. So now, with all that in mind, what's the slope of this inequality? Well, it would be the coefficient of x, so it would be 2 over 3. That's our rise over run. And then our b value would be -1. So our first point's going to go at -1 on the y-intercept. The second point will be made from going up 2, and then we will go to the right 3. So up 1, 2, to the right 1, 2, 3. And I could make more points if I wanted to. I could make some this way. Doesn't really matter. All right, so now my graph needs to either be, first of all, dotted or solid. So I have to look back at this inequality and help me decide dotted or solid. So hopefully you remember, since we just said it, if there's no line under the inequality, then we're going to have a dotted line. So this line right here is going to be dotted. And actually, let's try to make it a little bit better looking. If I could make this straight, it would be nice. That's about as straight as I can get it. All right, so we're making a dotted line once again because of this inequality symbol. Now, that inequality symbol also says less than. So now, this would be above this line. So the top side of it would be above. The bottom side of it would be below. When we see less than, it tells us to shade below. So we would shade all of this. And here's what this shading means. This shading means if there's a point, and I'll even try to do it bright. So if there's a point like right here, this yellow point, let's actually do, what's a good color that will stand out? This will. All right, so let's say there's this like pinkish looking point right here. If that point is in the shaded area, that means it is a solution to this inequality. If it's up here, like let's say I had a point up here, that would not be a solution because it's not in the shaded region. So the shaded region is actually telling us where are the solutions. And in this case, the solutions are all in this shaded spot right here. All right, so now let's do a couple more problems because honestly, practicing this is probably the only way you'll get better at it. So let's clear all this off and let's look at another example. And at first we'll do some easier ones and then I'll show you a couple harder ones. So let's say we have y is greater than or equal to negative 4x. So now we want to make sure this is in slope-intercept form, and we have y on one side by itself, so it is. So now we want to find the slope, which would be negative 4 over 1, and then b, if it's not written here, means 0. So our first point would go at 0, which is at the origin. Then we would go down 1, 2, 3, 4, and to the right 1. I could also make more points if I wanted to. I could go up here and do 1, 2, 3, 4, and then go to the left 1. All right, so now my second step is to figure out, okay, looking at this symbol, does that symbol tell me dotted or solid? And I always think about this. If there's a line under the inequality, then I'm going to draw a solid line that matches the line under the inequality. And that's not the worst. Let's do this. I'll cheat a little bit. I can do this, and it'll make it straight for me. All right. So now that's the line, but now we're not finished because there's two steps. First is dotted or solid. The second step is, should I shade above or below? Now, this inequality says greater than, so we're going to shade above. Now, for some people, this is kind of odd to see, but you want to look at this moving from the left to the right. You always want to act like from the left to the right. If it's pointing down, you want to look at this as being above. Okay, sometimes maybe you have to turn your head a little bit to see it. But if you have a negative slope, the top side's actually up here. So all of this area is what we would shade since it says greater than, so that would be above. And once again, here's what the shaded area means. Let's say there's a point right here. That point would be a solution to my inequality. But if there's a point over here, that point would not be a solution to the inequality. All right, let's look at a couple harder ones. Let's first start with this. You could see a problem like this, and it would say something like 5x plus 3y is less than or equal to 12. Okay, now, the only job we have here, the only curveball you're being thrown, is that this y is not isolated. So I would rather graph in slope-intercept form, which means y is by itself. So your job is to essentially solve this equation for y. So we would subtract 5x on both sides. Then we would have 3y less than or equal to negative 5x plus 12. Now I would divide by 3 on both sides. And I'm going to actually divide everything by 3. So I end up with y is not equal to, but less than or equal to negative 5 over 3x plus 4, because this actually, both of these are going to be divided by 3. Now, I want to make a quick note here. If that 3 were negative, like let's say we divided by a negative 3, remember there's a special rule for inequalities that says if we multiply or divide on both sides by a negative, that inequality symbol flips. Now, in our case, it did not flip, but I want to make sure you notice that it could have flipped had these 3's been negative. All right, maybe we'll look at one like that just in a second, but I want to make sure you're aware of that. So now, here's our equation, and our slope is negative 5 over 3, and then our y-intercept is 4. So we're going to start at 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and to the right, 1, 2, 3. And let's just leave it at those 2 points, and I'll cheat a little bit. We're going to make a solid line because this inequality symbol has a line under it. So if it's greater than or equal to or less than or equal to, then we're going to make, and actually, even with the help, I'm still not making my line straight. It's a little bit better. All right, So remember that if we have a line under our inequality symbol, that means solid line. So in this case, it would be solid. Now remember, if we have a negative slope, this is actually above up here, and this is actually below down here. So would we shade above or below for a less than symbol? And that would be below. So we would shade all of this down here, and I mean, you could kind of do it however you wanted, but all of this would be shaded. So that would be where our solution actually is. It would be in this shaded section all right here. All right, let's look at a couple more. I just want to show you this real quick. We won't even graph this one, but let me show you a quick example of when an inequality symbol flips. So let's say I have an inequality that looks like this. And actually, let's just do the whole thing. Because if you need to, you can skip through this if it's really just that unbearable. All right, so x minus 6y less than negative 12. So watch what happens here. I need to isolate y, which means I need to subtract x, then negative 6y is going to be less than negative x minus 12. But notice, I'm going to have to divide by negative 6. And remember, there's a special rule that says if I divide by a positive or if I divide or multiply by negative, this inequality symbol is going to flip. So this actually becomes greater than, and then this would become plus 2. So now here's our equation, or I guess it would be an inequality. So we would start at 2, we would go down or up 1 over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we could draw our line. And actually, this is going to be a dotted line because our inequality symbol is, and that's not straight at all, but it's okay. Our inequality symbol has no line under it, so that means dotted line. Now, it says greater than, so it would be above, and above would be up here. So that's how the answer would look. All right, let me show you one more. So this is probably the most confusing example, but we'll try to make it easy, or I'll try to make it easy for you. All right, so let's say I have x is less than negative 4. Maybe you're thinking, well, what the heck am I supposed to do with that? That makes no sense. But if you remember, x equals negative 4 is actually the equation for a vertical line. So this is actually a vertical line or a vertical graph when we actually graph it. So the first thing you're going to do is make a point at negative 4 on the x-axis. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Negative 4 would be right here. And then you're going to draw a vertical line through that, but you're still going to decide, does this inequality tell me dotted or solid? And it would tell me dotted. So this would be a dotted line going through negative 4. So that's what it looks like. Now, when I try to determine above or below, there's no above or below on this graph because it's literally a vertical line. So what you have to do is think about these x values that are going to the right of negative 4, and then these x values going to the left of negative 4. These values would be negative 5, negative 6, negative 7 to the left, and to the right they would be negative 3, negative 2, negative 1. So where would greater than actually be? Well, greater than would be over here because those values are increasing. Less than would be over here to the left because those values are decreasing. So if you see less than with a vertical line, it really means shade to the left. So we would shade all of this right here. So that would be how our solution looked. All right, and then let's just say, for example, it said y is greater than negative 4. Now we would shade over here. This would now be above for greater than. All right, so once again, remember these little tricks, or I guess these are actually the rules. If you see greater than or equal to, greater than or equal to or less than or equal to, that means a solid line. Okay, if you see less than or greater than, that means a dotted line. If you see, which actually let's just restart. If you see greater than or equal to or just greater than, that means to shade above. If you see less than or equal to or less than, that means to shade below.